This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the great.
Good afternoon. Very vigorous use of the gavel there. Sorry about that. That was slightly more vigorous than I'd originally planned. I'd like to welcome everybody here in the chamber and online to today's meeting of the London Assembly's Environment Committee. Members of the public may like to follow on social media at London Assembly, on Twitter. I think we might need to call it something else. X these days. Are we on Threads yet? Who knows? And use the hashtag Assembly Environment for this meeting. Could I just remind everybody who's in the chamber to turn their phones to silent mode, and if you leave your phone on so that it is on vibrate only, can you not put it in front of the microphone, because the microphones will pick it up, and could I ask both members and guests to do that? And could I also ask that when you're speaking into the microphone, if you can make sure that it is positioned so that you can be heard. And I will ask you potentially to move the microphone if we can't hear you. And can I just remind everyone to pick it up by the base, don't pick it up by its stem, which I've now heard is called a gooseneck. But unfortunately, the goosenecks are not very strong, and they will break off if you try and pick it up by the top. So please pick it up by the base. Today we've got two main items of business. The first is going to be a discussion about Solar Together, and the second is going to be a discussion about, it's going to be a continuation of our discussion on water and London rivers. And actually, to be fair, this is going to be a fairly lengthy ongoing discussion about Solar Together, which we've come to, I think, about 4 meetings now. However, before we move to those 2 items, we've got a number of items of business to attend to. Could I now just ask our committee clerk, Jack Booth, to confirm whether we have any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for absence have been received from Assembly Member Sahota, and Assembly Member Baker is attending as a substitute, and Assembly Member Best is attending online.
Thank you very much to Assemblymember Baker for joining us, and you're very welcome. Item 2 is declarations of interest. They are found on pages 1 to 4 of the agenda pack. Could I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2? Thank you. And could I ask if anyone has any other interests which they wish to declare? Assemblymember Devonish.
I just wanted to say Assemblymember Best doesn't seem to be online. She was just asking because she hasn't come up. So could we just check that, please, Chair?
Okay, I think that's probably not a declaration of interest. No. So can I just see if any members have any other interests to declare? And in the meantime, I will ask our team to see if they can work them. She is online. They've worked their magic. And indeed, we can now, in fact, see her. Item 3 is minutes, which are found on pages 5 to 58. Can we agree the minutes of the Environment Committee held on the 11th of July as a correct record? Great. Thank you. Item 4 is the summary list of actions, pages 59 to 82. Could I ask the committee to note the completed actions and the ongoing actions arising from previous meetings.
Noted.
Thank you. And we also have responses to committee outputs. We have a number of these. Can I ask the committee to note the following responses to our various outputs? Heathrow Airport have written back to the committee's letter concerning airport expansion. That's attached to Appendix 1 and has been circulated to everybody. Could that be noted?
Noted.
The Minister of State for Energy Security and Net Zero has responded to the committee's report, Powering Up London's Renewable Energy. That's attached as Appendix 2. Is that noted as well?
Noted.
Thank you. The Mayor has written back twice. He's written back to the report on Powering Up London's Renewable Energy. That's attached at Appendix 3. And our letter on wild spaces. That's attached at Appendix 4. Are both of those responses from the Mayor noted as well?
Noted.
Thank you. Item 6, Solar Together, brings us back to our panel, and I'd like to welcome the Deputy Mayor for Energy and Environment, Shirley Rodrigues, who has joined us today in the chamber, and I would also like to welcome the Assistant Director for Energy and Environment, Cathryn Barber, who is also here with us in the chamber. Thank you very much. Now, obviously, we have come to this item a few times, and Cathryn, I think this must be at least the third, possibly the fourth committee that you come to talk to Solar Together, but it is of great importance to Londoners, so you'll understand why we keep coming back to this. But I'd like to start really with asking the Deputy Mayor, can you give us an update on developments on the Solar Together scheme since we last met in July, when we heard from actually the Deputy Chief of Staff, Cathryn Barber, Austin Entonu, and then subsequently we heard from iChooser. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, first of all, I just want to reiterate how angry the Mayor is about the fact that Londoners have been let down by one of the suppliers of a scheme that has actually done a lot of good work in London, delivering successfully thousands of installations already over the phases that we've had. That this is the fifth phase, as you will know. Obviously, the Get Green Energy Together going into liquidation is a really bad issue, and one that we are working very hard with iChooser, who contracted them, to resolve for those customers who are still sort of waiting either deposits back or installations to be installed. As you mentioned, Cathryn, and others have been before you, and we've written and given a private briefing, I think, to members of the committee on the status so far. I'm pleased to say that we are making some progress. We're not making as fast progress as we would like, because Good Energy Together have appointed a liquidator, so Press Bailey. So we are waiting for that, for their investigations to be concluded. One of the creditors has also appointed or asked for a different liquidator to be appointed. So that, because of that situation, that isn't going to be resolved. I think the hearing is in a couple of weeks' time, at which point we will know which liquidator we're dealing with, and then I think then they can get on and resolve their issues, which they have a set timetable to resolve. Like many other authorities outside of London, whose customers have been affected, Londoners who've had their deposits back, we've been working to communicate with them, to ask them, what do they want to do? Just get the deposits back, carry on with installations if they're in that position. We've had a lot of success with moving many of those people into sort of a resolved stage, and Cathryn can update you with some numbers on that. And we'll be writing around to customers again later this month, again trying to draw a line and just keep that moving through the pipeline. We've also been trying to talk to some of the insurance companies involved. So HICE, the insurance scheme that sort of backs, in theory, the customers as well, as I said, as well as with the liquidator. The Mayor is absolutely clear that he doesn't want any Londoners to be out of pocket, but we're looking to those commercial organisations who are responsible for this to get them to live up to their responsibilities. But that's a key issue for us. So I think I'll leave it there unless you want to just give an update maybe on the numbers. Yeah.
Well, if I may, if I can just ask a sort of supplementary area that I'd like to, if you can touch on in your additional comments, Cathryn, that would be really helpful. I think iChooser gave us quite a lot of information, quite some length actually, last time about how they're attempting to contact people, and I just wondered if you could give us an update on that. Is the GLA itself directly trying to contact people? Is it just iChooser that's doing that? Are there still people out there that we've not managed to get in contact with who may potentially at this point still be unresolved in terms of being out of pocket in where they are in the install journey and all those sorts of things? That would be really helpful if you could touch on some of those.
Yes, so iChooser have done the outreach for us, and that's because they operate with the Solar Together London brand, and that's what customers are familiar with. They've now emailed out, made proactive phone calls to every customer. They haven't heard back from everyone. They've heard from the large majority. There are still some that they're waiting for responses from, and one can understand that sometimes emails go into inboxes and don't get picked up, or phone calls on answered as well, but they've been making a big effort on that. And actually in September they will be writing out registered delivery in the post to all of the customers to say this is what we understand your situation to be. Either you've got your deposit back, or you've moved on to having your installation done by one of the other contractors, or we haven't heard from you despite our many attempts to reach out to you. Please contact us within the next period, and we want to be sure that we're resolving everybody's issues. So that's the next step in terms of outreach, but they've been putting a lot of effort into that. Obviously, when customers have contacted the GLA directly, either through yourselves or to the Deputy Mayor or to the Mayor, we then come back directly to them. But usually that's in cooperation with iChooser, who've actually got the data on the installations. Just to say something on numbers, one piece of good news is that Phase 5 for the other two installers, Solar Bureau and Dynamis, is now very nearly complete. They had just over 900 original customers allocated to them as part of the Phase 5 wave, and 902 have now been completed. I think there are just 5 being left for the finance to be processed, but basically 2/3 of Phase 5 is now finished, and we're really pleased that does show that a scheme like this can work, as we thought from Phases 1, 2 and 3, where we'd had a very positive experience. On the GET customers, a large number have had their £150 deposits paid back. There are still some where we either don't know or we believe they haven't yet provided their bank details to iChooser to get the money back. And at the moment, the maximum number we believe who could be in that position of 450. That outreach that iChooser is doing, and the help that you can give us in sort of explaining to your constituents that if they want that £150 back, if they haven't had the work done, if they're not transferring to another provider, that's really useful. And then in terms of the 25% deposit, which some customers paid for Phase 5, we know that many have managed to get their money back through their banks if they paid on credit card or debit card. So nearly 199 people have got their money back that way. Kaz Byholt from iChooser, when he came to the committee in July, explained that where there was no other recourse for customers, if they weren't able to use the insurance that HICE should have provided, or that their banks weren't refunding them their deposits and the work hadn't been done, then iChooser itself would step in, and it has been doing that, and we know that nearly 70 customers have got money back that way.
About 70. Okay, well, that's some very clear figures, and I think the numbers are much clearer and a lot lower than the last couple of times when we've discussed this. However, Assemblymember Devenish and Assemblymember Bakari had indicated to me that they might wish to ask some follow-up questions. Assemblymember Devenish, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for the Deputy Mayor. At the end of this, do you hope, or hopefully you can commit to, that there will not be a single Londoner who has lost money? So in commercial contractual terms, you've managed to keep whole every single Londoner that's been through this rather difficult customer service experience?
That's our intention, as we've said. You know, we want to make sure that no Londoner is out of pocket. The Mayor has been very clear about that. We are, through iChooser, made repeated contacts with customers to ask them to clarify their status and to say, do you want your deposit back? Do you want an installation? Do you want to transfer to the other two companies? And as Cathryn has said, they've finished the allocated installs and are now going to be taking on, I think, about 200 of other customers who were previously customers and are now going to be transferred to them for completion. So that's our intention. And obviously, we've been clear that we want the commercial companies to live up to their responsibilities. So we would expect iChooser to be making sure that the customers get what they wanted initially, which was the solar installations, or aren't out of pocket. But the Mayor has been clear that he is going to pursue every option to make sure that customers get either their money back or their installations completed.
And you've kindly come and been questioned on this numerous times now. When do you think this whole episode will be done and dusted, and that will be the case? Have you got a date when you feel that will happen by, please?
I think it's because we were talking about the appointment of the liquidator. So Get have appointed a liquidator. Until that issue is resolved and until they've opined, I don't think we're going to see that concluded. I think not before the end of the year, I'd have thought. But in the meantime, while they're working out that process, we're trying to make sure that anybody who wants their deposits back, the £151, and Cathryn talked about the 450 or so, the registered letters should help bring people out, sort of raise awareness with people there, because they'll actually see a letter and then they can make a decision whether they want the deposits back at all or not. And then we'll work through all the others as soon as we can after that. Anyone who wants installations transferred to the other two companies, I think they're programmed to be done probably towards next year. Yeah. But hopefully by the end of the year. But we can come back to you and write to you, I think, separately if we once we've got some clearer timelines. But I think we've got to get through the liquidator issue at the moment, which is in the next few weeks. So we'll get some clarity, I think, after that.
And my final question, Chair, is I guess the overall question we would all agree with, which is solar is probably one of the best ways to actually help save the planet, and this kind of bad publicity isn't helpful. When this is over, do you have plans that next year, hopefully, you will relaunch the whole and perhaps rebrand your solar PV and try and get even more Londoners taking up solar PV on their roofs and really drive the project? Because obviously the Mayor has been in power now for 7 years. It would be nice if we got a step change next year. He may have another reasons. I think there's an election next year, I believe. So do you think there will be a announcement in the spring on that? Can we get, really pump up the volume on solar in London?
I think we already have pumped up the volume. The reason why we expanded to 3 companies under Solar Together 5 was because of the interest of Londoners, because the Mayor was keen to support Londoners through his solar action plan to expand that and for London to be a solar city. There are, I think that the thing that we have to do now is concentrate on getting those customers who've been affected, making sure they get their money back or their installations complete. In parallel, we commissioned an evaluation of what has happened so that we learn some lessons, so that future iterations, whether it's a Solar Together or a different type of scheme, really learn the lessons of this. I mean, some of the issues that have been highlighted have been supply chain issues. So, even though we had 3 companies doing this, there's issues about due diligence, who do we contract with, are there enough suppliers out there? And we know that not really for the demand that we need to see, the expansion of whether it's solar or retrofit or whatever in London. So there are a whole host of issues that we're looking at. But the Mayor is very clear that, he has some very tough solar targets to meet, and he wants to make sure that Londoners who want to do that, are helped as much as they can be.
I won't pursue this now, but perhaps when Cathryn gives the update, she could just write and remind us how many rooftops there are in London, both commercial and residential, and what percentage of the rooftops have actually got PV on at the moment. I think there's a huge target there that we should do more on. Thank you.
Well, as you know, one of the initiatives that has been taken since 2016 has been the solar opportunity map, which we discussed in relation to our first investigation during May and June of this year in relation to community energy, and the way that the community energy groups have taken the solar opportunity map and have been using it to put a lot of solar up wherever they can, working with councils and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think that would be really useful. Thanks for confirming what the Deputy Chief of Staff said last time about no Londoner being out of pocket. It's good to get that message very strong. I'm going to bring in Assemblymember Bakari.
Thank you.
And then very briefly, Assemblymember Polanski.
Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to just thank the Chair, who's been in touch with the Deputy Mayor to get as much information as possible. And I think what I'd really like to see is a continuation of that communication. I think there is frustration here from us. We want to be open and transparent at all times, and there are certain times that there are issues and reasons why that's not always the case, and there are things that some people will be wondering about. So I do want to make that clear that this is very necessary, that at some point we do need to be completely open and transparent, and at some point I hope that does happen so that all our customers know exactly the full story. Because unfortunately, despite the fact that solar energy is something that we will continue to be promoting, the Mayor of London's badge has been damaged, and his reputation and the trust between the people of London and choosing the Mayor of London's branded initiatives has been damaged. What will you be doing proactively to fix this and make sure that people do trust you again?
Well, I think, as Cathryn's pointed out, we've just seen almost 900 installations going in with the other two companies here. This company, selected by one of our contractors, who reported them having carried out due diligence and which passed all the tests, has failed, and that is hugely regrettable. And the Mayor has apologised for the distress this has caused Londoners. I think as I've said, the lessons learnt evaluation that we're doing at the moment is going to highlight sort of things that we or others might be able to do better. But this is an issue that has really highlighted things that are beyond the Mayor's control, things about regulation and consumer protection. We thought that, and we were reassured that, and iChooser were reassured that customers had guarantees and protections that seemingly don't seem to be in place. And we've raised that before with you at the committee. The processes that iChooser went through in terms of the due diligence were right, but they didn't pick up the issue of GET. So what more can that could be done about that? There's some issues around government regulation and consumer protection as well. So lots of things that that we all collectively have to learn to reassure people that the focus on solar is the right thing, that the schemes that have run very successfully for 4 phases until just most recently, is right, and there are many other schemes that the Mayor runs as well that are very successful. So whilst we have one bad company, I do completely understand it. It knocks people's confidence, but we want to reassure people. I think we have been reassuring people that through the efforts that the team have been doing, Cathryn, Austin, many others in the team, Sarah, plus people at iChooser who are really trying to work to ensure that people aren't out of pocket, get their installation so that they feel confident in the scheme and in solar as we move forward. As Tony Denbish was talking about, the Assemblymember Denbish was saying, this is absolutely critical to London's net zero target, but the UK's target. So we also need government to help us with the supply chain and so on.
I imagine that there's going to be some fairly strong recommendations that we'll be making from this. We know that this has impacted outside of London as well, as Get UK has collapsed absolutely everywhere. It's not just a London issue. And we also know that iChooser work with over 200 local authorities. And I think there are some issues here that once some of these behind the scenes currently wrangling over who exactly is picking up responsibility for this, that, and the other.
I think the consumer protection
to bring out into the public, as Assembly Member Bakari correctly says.
And we'd be very happy to explain also around the consumer protection issues as well.
Exactly.
You know, because I think
that's one of them.
You know, those were things that customers relied on, and we relied on, and iChooser relied on. And when they fail, as they have seemingly failed, you know, whilst we're very happy to try and step in and, you know, make sure Londoners are not out of pocket, that isn't right, because that sort of whole consumer protection issue is really key to confidence.
That's one of the things that became apparent to us during the course of our many-part investigation of asking you to come back to several meetings. As this situation has unfolded, the consumer protection issue has emerged as being one of the failings. I'm going to bring in Assemblymember Platsky, who has assured me he's going to be very brief.
Very, very brief. Thank you both for being here, and I think the committee have noticed your willingness to be scrutinised on this issue. We've done it several times. I want to look at the future as well, where we need a lot more solar panels, as Assemblymember Devenish said. There's a supply chain issue, but there's also a skills gap issue. Would you agree that the Mayor could be doing more with the adult education budget? And I understand that's not directly your portfolio, but environment, as with so many things, is intersecting, and unless all these points join up, we're just not going to have the people to install these solar panels.
I'm actually going to stop you from answering that question, because in October we are doing a whole meeting on skills that relate to low carbon, and that is definitely going to be an issue that we will cover in that meeting in detail, rather than just getting a quick answer now from both Cathryn and Shirley. So hold that very thought about the use of the adult education budget, bring it back in October. Sorry to cut you off in your prime. I'm going to draw this to a close now, because we've done our 20 minutes is up. We have
15 seconds.
Assemblymember Best, very quickly.
Thanks so much, Chair. Sorry, just 2 seconds. Shirley, you just said the Mayor's apologised. Could you just point me to where I can see that, please?
I think he's been in front of the Assembly at Mayor's questions, where he's expressed his strong regret and apologies for that.
Several other people on the committee are nodding. We will get the specific reference for you, Assemblymember Best, as to exactly which meeting he said that in, and it may have been more. Okay, I'm going to draw the discussion, and I'd like to thank both Deputy Mayor Rodrigues and Assistant Director Barber for coming along for that discussion and for your responses. We're just going to take a very small adjournment to move on to our next item on water and rivers. But can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion that we've just had and the answers that were given? Is that agreed? Thank you. Right, we're just going to adjourn very momentarily. I've forgotten to turn on the microphone. Okay, welcome back everybody. And this is the second part of the meeting where we've been discussing water and rivers. And we're going to split this into two panels so that people don't have to necessarily stay for everything. And joining us in the chamber for the first panel are Dan Bicknell from the GLA, who has responsibility for climate adaptation. Shirley Rodrigues, the Deputy Mayor, is staying for this part of the discussion. We've also been joined by Cathryn Ross, who is the Interim Co-Chief Executive of Thames Water, and also by Grace Rawnsley, who is the Director of Sustainability and Net Zero Transition at the PLA, the Port of London Authority. I'd like to welcome all of our guests and say thank you to Shirley for agreeing to stay on for this part of the discussion. However, before we get into the set of questions that we were planning to ask, I wondered if I could turn to Cathryn, because obviously there's been quite a lot of news going on in London this morning, covered by most of the London outlets, and also for those of us who represent South West London, and sadly for you, I do. I've been contacted by quite a number of constituents saying there is no water coming out of my tap this morning, and I understand that this was something to do with both Ashford and Hampton, that tankers have been deployed to streets. Look like about 35 postcodes where people without water. Obviously I'm most aware of the ones in my SW constituency. I just wondered if you could tell us what on earth has happened. Schools sent home, London has no water, this is not a great look. What's happened? How did it happen? Is it fixed? Could it possibly happen again?
Yeah, okay. Let me give you a full readout of where we are with the incident. But before I do that, if I could just take a moment to apologise for all of our customers and the affected parts of London. I understand this has been quite an extensive incident. Lots of people have been affected. I'll say a little bit more about how many in a second. And obviously we're acutely aware also of the impact on schools that are just going back, and also there are a number of hospitals who were affected in the relevant areas. So please, I do want to offer my apologies on behalf of Thames for the disruption. So what actually happened this morning, the incident began at 7:15 this morning. It was caused by a power issue in West London. There was a power outage. That affected Ashford and Hampton water treatment works, which are two of our largest works in London, and actually both of those works shut down, and that is a normal response to a power failure in these works. It sort of helps to preserve public health. That meant that we were trying to keep London on supply by drawing more heavily on Walton and Kempton water treatment works, and that also caused those works to trip. So we had 4 affected works in total this morning, even though 2 of them, Ashford and Hampton, were actually affected by the original power outage. Obviously, the root cause of that is a matter for UKPN, the power company, and obviously we're talking to them about that. The impact of the incident was essentially an immediate loss of supply to customers who were within an area of supply that was directly pumped from Hampton, and that was around maybe up to 114,000 properties, so it's a very large incident. And we also had the potential for supply interruptions to the northwest and to the centre of London. The northeast of London, I should say, was unaffected because that is served from our Copper Mills water treatment works, and that was not affected. So the actual impact, whilst it could have been up to 114,000 properties, we believe the actual impact was much lower because obviously there was water still in the system that allowed some people still to keep drawing on it after the outage. Obviously, our primary concern was the protection of health and safety and preservation of water quality. So that was what we were trying to do when we were managing the incident. We immediately stood up a level 4 incident, so that's our gold command structure. It's a serious incident affecting a large number of people. We did step in to manage flows within our London system directly using the London ring main and strategic storage in the area, and that allowed us to mitigate the impact. We were also able to step up additional customer support in order to make sure that we had staff in our customer contact centres able to deal with contact from the public. So anyway, as a result of all of this, we did manage to improve the situation quickly so that within an hour of the original outage, we had begun to restore flow. And as of 11 a.m. this morning, the flow from the affected sites was reasonable, not back to full flow, but it was a reasonable flow. And we also stood up 3 bottled water stations. So we've got a bottled water station at Sainsbury's in Hampton Hill in TW12, at Tesco in Mogden Lane on the borders of TW7 and TW3, and at the Lidl B&Q car park in Twickenham, TW2. All those bottled water stations should be open by now. If they're not, it'll be by 3 o'clock. We're planning to keep those open until 9, and they'll be open tomorrow from 8 until 9 as well, and frankly, as long as we need to. We are aware that 2 hospitals were in the affected area, the Royal Hospital for Neurodisability in Putney, and also the West Middlesex Hospital in TW7. We contacted them proactively. We had tankers available to support them, but in fact they were back on supply before they needed that tankered supply. We're also aware that the Shooting Star Children's Hospice in TW12 was in the affected area. Again, we contacted them proactively to provide support, but they do have water, so they have water on supply. In terms of the current position, our Ashford Works is now fully back on capacity. Hampton should be back very, very soon on full capacity. It's already producing water. Walton and Kempton have been back in supply for some time. They tripped. There were minor issues, and we brought them back quickly. There is a risk, because we're talking about an area of supply which is directly pumped. There's a risk of airlocks as we restore supply into the system, and that's why we're maintaining those bottled water stations for as long as we need to. We are also proactively contacting schools and non-household properties, including those hospitals and the hospice I mentioned later on today, to check the situation and to make sure that they have the supply that they need. So that's a summary of the latest position.
And I think everyone on the committee would commend you for what sounds like an excellent response. But I guess it does still leave open my question, which is how on earth did this happen? And it was really quite widespread. And could it possibly happen again?
Well, the reason for the outage, as I said, was a supply interruption. And then obviously there was a knock-on effect as we drew more heavily on Kempton and Walton. I mean, at the moment, I think our efforts quite rightly need to be on managing the incidents and making sure that the customers who we've now brought back into supply stay on supply, and that everybody who may be at risk of coming off supply, we know who they are and we know what they need in terms of support. We will do a review. We will look at what the root cause was. We'll look at whether there was anything we could have done better, and we'll obviously learn lessons. We're not there yet. We're still managing this as a Goal Command incident.
I mean, obviously, we'd had this meeting planned anyway. We didn't plan it with this incident, booked in or anything like that. So I am asking you, in one sense, a question in the middle of something. So perhaps when it's over and you have conducted the review, if you felt able to share that in full with the committee, I think we would appreciate that, because obviously a lot of Londoners have been contacting us, including obviously some people who knew that we were going to be having this conversation about other aspects of water this afternoon. Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind. I think Assemblymember Devenish might want to come in as well.
I think you've mainly covered my questions, Chair, but just to, I should say 3 things. One, I know Ashford very well because my grandfather moved there in 1899 and my mother passed away there last year, so I know the area very well. And I should always declare I used to work for Thames Water, but a long time ago, 1999 to 2004, so welcome to the job. Good luck. One thing that would be really useful when you do write to us, Cathryn, would be, and you'll be picking us up being ex-Off-Water now that you're coming into Thames, these incidents obviously happen at times. It's how you deal with them and what lessons you learn from them over time. And I just wondered, I always worry with Thames, as I do with Transport for London, that they always say, oh, we've always responded this way. Now, they always respond this way because that's what engineers do, and the procedures are very robust, and I'm sure that's fine, but you should always be trying to improve things, and how you improve things as you go along as the new Chief Exec, I'm sure you'll be doing that. So anything specific on that would be useful in your report. Thank you.
Yeah,
Did you still
very happy to do that.
Yeah, thank you. And did you still want to come in as well?
Yes, thank you.
Cathryn.
Thank you, Chair. As you won't be surprised, I've been in touch with the leader of the council and the local MP about this, and they're angry, actually. They have been in touch with Thames Water and have had limited information. They ultimately want to know exactly what happened, but also who to blame. Was it the power company or was it Thames Water's infrastructure? And those questions need to be answered fairly soon. And what was also incredibly frustrating, MP Munira Wilson's own child was actually one of the children who were impacted by the school closure, was that the school may actually not necessarily had to have been closed, because it was only just a couple of hours actually that there may have been no water, so between 9 and 11 o'clock. And the frustration from a lot of parents and also the council was that there were a number of schools that actually didn't need to be closed, that were closed. And one of the things that we need to make sure is that when these things happen, all stakeholders are engaged as quickly as possible. Please tell me that this will not happen again and that you will have something in place to make sure that those contacts are made immediately.
Yeah, I mean, our efforts when we have an incident like this are first and foremost to preserve public health and safety. That's our main objective. So yes, we will do everything that we can to communicate with those who are affected as soon as possible. I think in this incident it was a little bit unfortunate. The timing was at 7:15 in the morning, which is of course when everybody is beginning the day. And we didn't know at that moment when things would get back to normal and when supply would be restored. So I can understand why, you know, the decision of a school, having been informed that there is no water available, might then take a decision at the beginning of the day not to open the school or to keep the school closed because of the absence of information about when the supply will be restored. We do try our very, very best to keep people informed when there is an incident with the best information we can. But it doesn't really do anybody any favours if we give information that we then have to amend later on in the day. So if at that moment in time, as happened this morning, we did not know when the supply was going to be restored, all we can say is we're working as quickly as possible, but we don't know. And then the school has to react on that basis. But once again, I can only apologise to those in the affected area for the inconvenience and disruption that there was today.
When you do have a report to bring to us, will that be also shared with the council leader as well as the MP as well, who's been asking questions and not received much so far?
Yes, I'm happy to share our review and our conclusions. And one thing I was perhaps going to suggest, if this committee wants to talk further about the lessons from this, obviously it's your choice, but it might be useful to have a session that involves also the power provider as well, because in this instance, the cause of the incident was a power outage. It was a problem with the UKPN network. As far as we know at this stage, and we will do a review, but as far as we know at this stage, our assets and our equipment performed as we would expect them to do, in line with our first priority, which is to preserve health and safety in the face of an incident like
Brilliant.
this.
Thank you. Within that report, it would be useful to know exactly when you did contact all the stakeholders, specifically the council. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks very much for actually, in fact, talking about something that is a bit of a tangent from some of the other things that we were going to cover today, and doing that with as much information as possible. We've obviously asked if you can come back to us, and you have said that you will. So thank you very much for picking that up. And I did actually hear some children being vox-popped this morning by some reporters who were saying, well, we were glad to be sent home because we came into school and all the toilets were really smelly. So that was their viewpoint. Of course, children probably being sent home from school, they probably enjoyed it in any case, but clearly that's not the point. We're now going to come back to the main set of questions, and we're going to start by asking some questions about energy generation from the river, which I think we're very interested to see whether or not it's being sufficiently investigated and exploited, if you like. So I'm going to start with that as an open question, which I'm going to start with the Deputy Mayor, Shirley Rodrigues. What do you think is the potential for using the Thames or other rivers in London, of course, to generate electricity? And then I'll come to the rest of you afterwards. Thanks, Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, obviously, with a net zero target, we have to exploit every possible avenue for renewable energy generation. And you referred earlier to community energy, for example, some of the work that we've been doing on solar, some of the work that we've been before the committee before on using waste heat, for example, from some of our energy from waste plants and so on. So the river is absolutely, a potential for this. How big a potential is being looked at the moment? And I know Environment Agency have been looking at it, as have we. We've been working with them, Port of London Authority, Thames Water themselves have got a renewable energy arm as well. So collectively, we've been looking at those issues, and I mean, obviously, they vary from small projects to what might be a bigger opportunity. But I think it's fair to say that it's still in developmental stage, feasibility stage. So I think most of the focus really has been on land rather than on the river. But absolutely, we need to be looking at that. And there has been a lot of work between the collective organisations around here on what the opportunities might be. Then the usual issues around financing and capacity, and as Assemblymember Polanski talked about, skills, and how you implement all of those things. So it's all part of that bigger picture.
Thank you. Cathryn, on a completely different topic, this is obviously an area that I have previously discussed with various representatives from Thames Water. Do you think there's more potential? I know this is an area that is being looked at. What more can be done to look at the Thames or other rivers in London for energy generation?
Yeah, I mean, I think I very much agree with what the Deputy Mayor says. I mean, if we're going to meet our net zero ambitions and make the contribution we all need to make to climate change mitigation, we have to leave no stone unturned. We at Thames Water have now set up a separate company called Thames Water Ventures to look at renewable energy and also property potential as well. So really it's Thames Water Ventures that is looking at this stuff. The most exciting opportunities we see, if I'm being really honest with you, are really sort of threefold. One is about the potential for gas to grid, which is converting our current combined heat and power generation into gas that we can then put back into the grid. We think that's a terrific renewable energy source. We think that the gas there has the potential to heat up to something like 21,000 homes. The blocker at the moment is that we are not currently eligible for the Green Gas Support Scheme, because that support scheme only supports new infrastructure. And so if we are replacing our current CHP assets with new gas-to-grid assets, they wouldn't qualify for the scheme. And of course, that changes the economics. So that's exciting opportunity number one. Exciting opportunity number two, we think, is for floating solar. So we have something like 19 square kilometres of reservoir surface within the M25. That's a tremendous opportunity, and we see the potential there to have up to 1 gigawatt of floating solar generation within the M25, and that's of course important because that's where the people are, and it's the people who need the energy, so ability to generate the energy where it's needed is really exciting. And then I think finally, and this is probably the most exciting, is the potential to generate heat from effluent. We think that at the effluent that we currently have within London alone could generate 10 terawatt hours of wastewater heat, which, to give you a feel for that's the equivalent of 40% of Hinkley Sea. That's a tremendous untapped resource, and the technology is actually quite simple, because basically all you're doing is you're using the fact that effluent is relatively warm because of where it comes from. And you put a heat inverter around the sewer pipe, and you can extract the heat from that. Now, that is a fairly early stage technology, but our ventures company is in discussions with a couple of really good opportunities on that. So that would have a tremendous potential to contribute to the decarbonisation of heat, which is, of course, is one of the biggest challenges we face.
Some very interesting thoughts there. Grace, I wondered if you would like to come at this from the PLA angle.
Absolutely. So the PLA, very supportive of renewable energy in all of its forms. Obviously, the River Thames provides opportunities, particularly in terms of tidal energy and also in terms of water source heat pumps. And we are seeing an uptake in interest from developers to start to harness this type of energy. And the PLA, we really see ourselves as an enabler in that story. So we are working hard to kind of understand that feasibility case for a lot of the schemes that are coming through. We've done things like, for example, developed a tidal heat map of the River Thames so that people can see where the right places would be to invest in that sort of technology. And we also have a tidal energy demonstrator site that people can use and developers can use to test their tidal energy generators before they kind of bring them to scale in a kind of safe place that allows them to really understand what it would be like to be in the river. I think one of our challenges, obviously, is that it is a busy river, and these sorts of energy generation projects, they can't impede on the navigational channel. And so right now, a lot of what we're talking about is probably at a micro-generation scale, but that does offer really interesting opportunities to kind of produce small-scale electricity that is being directly delivered to where it needs to be delivered rather than potentially kind of grid input.
Yeah, I haven't heard anyone talking about installing a Thames barrage right in the middle of the River Thames, because that would be slightly awkward for a number of reasons. I'm going to bring in Assemblymember Polansky now, who's going to pick up the questions.
Thank you. Grace, if I can stick on the water source heat pumps, obviously we know about the Kingston Heights development. How many water source heat pump projects are there going on the Thames?
In terms of active development of water source heat pumps?
Both would be interesting to know what's going on and also what's in the pipeline. Excuse the pun.
Yeah, absolutely. So I believe that there are 2 existing water source heat pumps. They are small scale, so they feed just directly into one development or industry. But we are being approached more regularly by consortiums that are interested in doing larger scale water source heat pump projects. Those all go through our consenting team to understand what the environmental impacts and what the navigational impacts of those would be. So they kind of are at that sort of level of development at the moment.
Thank you. And my understanding is both the navigation issue that you just spoke about and also about the eels as well.
There is, yes. So we work very closely with the Environment Agency on the consenting of any of those sorts of schemes. So we would be looking at getting the right environmental permits, so making sure that there's not any implications for spawning fish or fish populations, as well as making sure that it wouldn't impact the eels regulations as well. So we look at it, the PLA look at it both from a navigational perspective and an environmental perspective. Also ensuring that anything that's coming back in from a water source heat pump isn't creating thermal plumes, for example, that might impact kind of fish migration.
That's really good to know. What do you see as the possibilities and benefits of water source heat pumps? Like, is this a big jigsaw piece of our clean renewable energy?
I think if you're talking about it at a kind of national level, then I think that it's a really interesting opportunity. I think the Thames is always going to be an issue simply because it's such a busy waterway. I think from a microgeneration perspective, I think it is a part of the puzzle. I think that as the colleagues have said, no stone can be left unturned really when it comes to creating the renewable generation that we need.
Great. And then you've been undertaking tidal energy trials at a site in Thamesmead. What are your learnings so far?
Our learning so far is that we haven't actually managed to get a tidal generation site, a tidal generation demonstrator in yet. We're in the process of doing that at the moment. Our learning so far has been that there are, again, environmental challenges to bringing tidal energy in. So turbines cause problems for fish and eels often. And so it has been, a challenging process, but one that we still see a lot of opportunity in, and we're kind of, we're ready to kind of push forward with our current tidal generator that we're looking at the moment to see if we can start to get some of that proof of concept and actually monitor the impact it has from an environmental perspective. So any tidal generator project that we're involved in, there's a requirement for them to monitor the impact it's having on fish and other parts of the ecosystem.
I hear the point you're making about the Thames being a fairly unique river in terms of how busy it is. Are there other cities around the world where they're doing this stuff well and you're in conversation with them, or you're kind of taking their learnings?
So I think the Thames is quite unique still. I think that there are other cities that are potentially doing more, but in a probably much less busy environment. I think what's nice about this area of work is that it's incredibly innovative and fast-paced. So we get approached with a lot of different schemes that are using a lot of different technologies that are potentially more environmentally sensitive as the technology progresses. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity in it for us, and I think that we just need to continue to focus in on those projects that are going to be able to fit within that unique environment that is the Thames.
Thank you. I'm going to move on now to questions about emissions for crafts. So in 2018, the PLA published its air quality strategy. What progress has there been since that?
There's been a considerable amount of progress since 2018 on air quality. Our first air quality strategy, we were the first port to develop an air quality strategy, and really the first iteration of our air quality strategy is about kind of gaining a deeper understanding of the impact that river operations have on air quality and emissions. And so we've done a huge amount of work in that respect in terms of developing an emissions inventory for the port, so we can really start to dig into the detail of the data to understand where the hotspots are for emissions along the Thames, and start to kind of tackle those. We've expanded our monitoring of air quality across the Thames, so we now monitor all the way from Teddington right down into the South End on both passive and active monitoring on a kind of real-time basis in terms of air quality. And we've also brought in a number of really positive actions. So, for example, we've transitioned our own fleet to hydrogen vegetable oil, so HVO fuels. And I think that really sparked a number of other operators on the Thames to also follow suit. So we know that quite a few of the tug operators have now transitioned to a lower carbon fuel as well as bringing in our Thames Green Scheme and our Green Tariff. So our Green Tariff is a port duty discount for ships that are more environmentally friendly, and our Thames Green Scheme is for inland ships that can also show environmental credentials that say that they aren't producing quite as much emissions.
Thank you. I was going to go down a rabbit hole about hydrogen oil, but I won't do. So your 2020 update to the strategy said that you'll provide a full review by the end of 2022. Has this been completed?
We're in the process of doing the review as we speak, so it should be launched by the end of 2023. And it will really focus, our review will focus moving from that kind of information gathering, stakeholder engagement, and small-scale action to what actions can we really take that are big and hard-hitting and that can help drive down some of the emissions that we're seeing. We have the data, the knowledge, the evidence, and now we're kind of thinking about what that next step looks for us.
Thanks, and I hear we'll get that at the end of this year. Mm-hmm. Are there any kind of things you'd trail or any notable developments you'd say this is really interesting?
I think the uptake of our Thames Green Scheme will be really powerful for the river in terms of that incentivization of moving to greener alternative fuels. I think we need to be looking across the sector about how we support the wider transition to green fuels as well, so to low carbon fuels or alternative fuels, whether that be hydrogen or ammonia or e-methanol within the shipping sector and also within the inland sector. We've seen huge strides just in the past week. It's London International Shipping Week this week, so it's a great time to be talking to you, with the launch of the Earth Clipper, which is a hybrid vessel, as well as we have just won a consortium bid for some funding to develop a hydrogen-powered autonomous survey vessel. So I think that the technology is starting to kind of catch up to the challenge to a certain degree when it comes to vessels, and that will start to drive down those emissions on the river.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Baker is going to pick up the questioning now.
Thank you. I did have a supplementary.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to come in? I thought you wanted to come in later. Okay, sorry.
It was just actually to pick up on a very good point that Cathryn made about effluent. And I think there's an education piece here that I think we could just share very quickly here, because I've been learning quite a lot about it. You won't be surprised where I've been hearing this from. But I do want to know a little bit more about this, because it's renewable energy that's actually coming from sewage. And that then creates some sort of biogas and then kind of could fit some electricity needs it sounds very exciting, obviously. But I would like to know a little bit more about how those cost savings will impact the customer. Will it go directly to them?
Well, yes. I mean, I suppose is the short answer. So there are two ways that would happen. So the first is that when Thames Water earns any income from doing things like that, then we share that income back directly with our customers. That's a regulatory requirement. But also, and I think this is quite interesting for us, one of our biggest single costs is actually our own energy consumption. If you look at the sort of topography of the Thames Valley, we do a lot of pumping water about. So actually any energy that we can generate ourselves, both firstly it improves our own carbon emissions position, but it also reduces our energy costs. And that means that we actually need to charge our customers less because our costs have gone down. So there are two ways that this benefits our customers, as well as, of course, it's a greener source of energy and it helps with decarbonisation. So yes, our customers will benefit.
I will be talking about this later as well. You won't be surprised.
I mean, I think you've used that same principle, haven't you, with using AD to, and the energy generated from the anaerobic digestion has been used to offset the cost of the activities on those sites, which we won't go into in detail. I'm now going to come back to Assemblymember Baker.
Yes, back to the boats. Slight diversion. Thanks. I've got some more questions following on from Assemblymember Polanski's questions about emissions. And Grace, back to you. So in the air quality strategy, so in 2020, that we had, as we've discussed, a number of actions in the air quality strategy, but some of those are, some of it's outside your control. We know there's a very, very complicated regulation around multiple levels around emissions. So some of the actions were to work with the Department of Transport to see whether you can work on new emission standards and also work with the GLA around potentially an ultra-low emission zone for the river. What progress have you managed to make on working with either of those organisations, agencies to progress those?
So in terms of our work on a potential ultra-low emission zone for the river, or we called it RULEZ, was an update really is that where we're at with that at the moment is we've done an initial scoping exercise and we're into a process now of doing a feasibility assessment. So looking at what the economic implications would be, as well as, is the technology ready for something like that, and what the appetite is with various different, agencies and partners that we would need to work with in order to develop that. So I think the short answer is watch this space. I think, we'll be able to report back on our progress on that in the not too distant future, probably early next year, in terms of what our feasibility assessment is kind of coming out with.
That's right, and on that specifically, is that being done? I mean, obviously you're the PLA. That's your responsibility to the river. So, port. So, is that being done with an eye on? So, for instance, there are trials for light freight that potentially could move a lot more light freight, long distances that can then be delivered at the other end. That overall would actually remove a lot of emissions, but we know there's long turnover on craft on the river. So is that being done in isolation in terms just of emission standards, or is it able to look at what the river can sort of add and take away in terms of overall transport emissions in the city?
Absolutely. So, the promotion of light freight is a key strategic aim for the PLA. We see it as a really important tool in the overall reduction of emissions across London and wider. So that is a key strategic aim for us, and something that we're working very, very closely with a variety of partners to develop, both from a demonstrator perspective, but also to how do we scale light freight on the river. We're at that stage now where that's the next question: how do we get that really moving as much as we possibly can?
That would be good, because it would be good to put that in the wider rather than just looking at what the boat's doing. And so on the work with the DFT, is there any progress? Other areas of transport, everything's stuck in the mud, so I don't know whether there is here. Is there any progress in terms of emission standards around this?
I'm not sure exactly where we are with that now. What I'll do is I can write back to the committee with an update on where we are with that.
I could probably guess, but it would be good to have that confirmed. Thank you. And you referred earlier on to emissions monitoring along Thames. I think you said Teddington South End. Can you expand at all on the extent of that and whether there's anything you've particularly learned from this expansion monitoring?
So we monitor, and I'm going to channel my air quality technical advisor when I say this. We monitor using diffusion tubes as well as real-time monitoring through a contract with an environmental consultant. We monitor against all of the kind of SOx and NOx and particular matter, etc., as well as monitoring carbon emissions through a partnership we have with an organisation that does emissions modelling for ship movements. So we have a relatively good understanding of how the emissions kind of map across the river in terms of where we might have hotspots. And what we've done in the last year is we've also focused in on increasing our monitoring in the areas where we feel that there might be hotspots as well. And we've also gained a lot of interesting information about the types of vessel movements and the types of vessels themselves and what emissions are coming from those vessels as well. So we're able to kind of say, well, actually, do you know what, targeting this type of vessel in this type of way is going to make the biggest impact. And that's really what our next air quality strategy is going to start to draw down.
That's helpful. Thanks very much. Back to you, Jo.
Thank you. Confusingly, we're going to move on from Assembly Member Ellie Baker to another Assembly Member with the same initials, Emma Best. So I'm going to bring in Assembly Member Best, who has just popped up on screen. So it's going to be questioning from the, I don't know, I think it goes on all the speakers around the room.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I know when you're a guest, when I'm on Assembly, you don't never know where to look, do you? When someone's on the mighty screens all around. But thank you to all the guests for being there. I wanted to stick with Port of London Authority just and ask, what are you doing to increase the proportion of craft using renewable energy sources?
Sorry, could you just repeat that? I missed the question. Just there was a bit of noise.
Yes, sorry. What are you doing to increase the proportion of craft vessels using renewable energy sources?
So I can speak from our own fleet. So our own fleet has been entirely transitioned to a lower carbon fuel, not alternative fuel, HVO. So one of the reasons was I think that I think the PLA felt it was absolutely the right thing to do to transition to a lower carbon fuel. But also I think we wanted to signal to the rest of the river operators that this was possible, it was feasible, and it was something that they might like to also do. And we have seen uptake in a lot of the companies transitioning to these fuels as a transition, an interim measure until the technology allows and catches up to allow us to move to zero carbon vessels. One of the ways in which we support the wider community of vessels on the Thames is we definitely see ourselves as an enabler of a lot of this work. And so we work with a large number of consortiums to try and achieve grant funding, to do demonstrators, a part of the kind of Clean Maritime Demonstration Fund or the Zero Emission Vessel Infrastructure Fund. We supported a number of consortium bids to bring in new and exciting types of technology that will help the transition, particularly of inland vessels, to low carbon or battery electric. So there is a number of different ways, but obviously it's an area that we don't have full control over. We operate our own fleet, but we don't have a fleet that is enormous, and obviously others have their own vessels and own them. But we do a huge amount to try and influence that. I guess the last thing to kind of point out is that we have launched a net zero coalition of operators on the river with this in mind. How do we promote and how do we support the operators to take those steps in the right direction in terms of reducing their emissions, both carbon but also air quality emissions? And this Net Zero Coalition should be presenting back at the end of the year a plan for how we are going to achieve that together. So I think it's a convening and a supporting and enabling role that we are taking in this transition.
Thanks. And just on electric charging on piers or within berths, is there any progress on that you can report?
It's something that we are very interested in, and we have been doing a huge amount of feasibility studies on in order to understand what the challenges are, what the opportunities are in terms of supporting shore power. It will be an important element of the transition for the shipping industry as well as for the inland vessels as well. So it's something that we are keenly aware of, and we are, as the PLA, finding we're finding that niche for us to really support that transition.
Are there any targets on when you'll see more electric charging points on piers and berths?
We don't have any targets at the moment in terms of what we will see. Obviously, we don't also own all of the piers and the wharfs, so it's difficult for us to put targets across a very complex community of operators and owners. But it's something that we can certainly support and bring to the table with our Net Zero Coalition. I'm not sure where we will get to with targets.
Okay, so no firm plans at the moment?
At the moment, we're in early stages with our Net Zero Coalition, so we're meeting at the beginning of October to have an initial workshop to understand, what the plan might look like, and go from there.
Thanks. And Shirley, if I could come to you, I think quickly, there was a Clean Air Thames project funded by the Mayor for £500,000 from 2019 to 2022. And the aim was to retrofit 11 river vessels. Could you provide a breakdown of what happened with that project or progress?
I'm happy to write to you. It's not in my briefs, I'm afraid I don't have that to hand, but I'm very happy to write to you with information on that, unless you know anything about it, Dan. No, afraid not, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would have been an interesting project to hear more about, and I might have just given you an opening there to be positive about the Mayor. So if you could just write instead, that would be great. I just wanted to check as well, if I could come back to Port of London just quickly on the ideas around the river ULEZ or RULEZ. Is there going to be any research into that? Or have you commissioned any research at all?
We have done an internal scoping document, and we're in the process of looking at a wider feasibility study.
Okay, thank you. And Shirley, if you don't agree with what the conclusions of that report, will you be emailing the Port of London to ask that they change the report, or will you just accept them?
We have very strong engagement with the Port of London Authority at all times. We look at evidence and we discuss issues, just as you'd expect us to do, just as government does, just as many other organisations do when they're looking at strategies and development plans.
So you might intervene if you don't like the conclusions then?
As I said, I'm always happy to engage.
All right, press releases, either or. Okay, thanks. I just wanted to move on then to talk about the Thames and London Waterways Forum. And this question's really to the whole panel. The Thames and London Waterways Forum replaced previous bodies such as the London Waterways Commission and the River Concordat. How would you assess the impact of Thames and London Waterways Forum's work?
Is that directed to me or yeah?
Well, yeah, you can kick off. Yeah, go for it.
For all of us, yeah. Well, the point of replacing those forums was to ramp up activity on the Thames and London Waterways Forum. This is an area that involves many partners, as the PLA and River Thames Water have said. There are lots of partners, including the riparian boroughs as well, that we have to take into account, people who use the river as well as those who operate on it. We've been doing a lot of work, for example, on freight, on piers, as a pier strategy, on, you've heard from the PLA about some of the air pollution work and water quality work as well. So I think my understanding is that there's a conference later in the year where the forum will be updating on activity. It's led by the Deputy Mayor for Transport, and officers from within the GLA's Good Growth Department and across the GLA, in fact, are involved, including TfL, PLA and other officials. So I'm very happy to update the committee on the impacts when we have that report.
Did anybody else on the panel want to contribute to that? No. Okay. Well, Shirley, to come back to you then quickly. There's been no details published since 2018 on the progress of the forum's work or any meeting details. Has it? I'm guessing that doesn't mean there hasn't been any work since 2018. So, is there any plans to better disseminate that information?
I'd have to ask the chair. As I said, it's chaired by the Deputy Mayor of Transport. My understanding, there was a meeting just recently in July, and as I've said, there's an annual conference, one later this year. So I'm very happy to send you information about their meetings and get them to update you on impacts.
Yeah, thanks. And perhaps that's something for the committee to write separately to the Deputy Mayor for Transport then to ask about those meeting details. Do you know whether the Mayor of London has ever attended one of the forums?
I'm afraid I don't know, because it's not my area. So whilst the forum looks at a number of issues that cover environment, it covers a sort of broad range of issues from economy as well. So again, maybe we can add that to the list of questions that we can write back to you on.
Okay. So again, I had one final question then. I'm not sure whether you want to write back on this one as well, but it was whether the forum had any plans or suggestions, whether there was any plans or suggestions for the forum to operate in any other ways that were going to help it be successful. But I'm guessing perhaps improvements, you might want to speak to the other stakeholders and come back on that as well.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that back and ask people to do that.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think from our point of view as scrutineers, we find it extremely difficult and very opaque to try and figure out what on earth it's doing, because it doesn't publish anything. We don't get invited to its annual conference, and we don't really hear anything about it. And yet it replaced at least one body, which previously was chaired by one of the Assembly members. So it sort of seems to have become quite obscure to us. So I think we will be writing to the Deputy Mayor for Transport so that we can try and find out a little bit more about a mysterious body that apparently has had no minutes published since 2018, which I think is about 5 years. I'm going to pass over to Assembly Member Polonsky.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, this is on flooding. What are your key priorities in developing the London surface water strategy?
You remember the flash flooding incidents in 22, and you'll have seen this summer many events across Europe and beyond, in fact, of flash flooding incidents, very serious incidents. Our priorities are to make sure that we protect people and infrastructure, and that we prepare people as far as possible. I think the problem has been, what was really highlighted by those incidents was the responsibilities for surface water flooding don't exist in one organisation. They're spread amongst a number of organisations. In fact, the Mayor doesn't have responsibility. It's the boroughs as water management authorities, the Environment Agency, Thames Water to some extent, Transport for London. So what we've collectively done after the Mayor convened a round table is to set up a working group which is chaired by those specifically with responsibility, so the Environment Agency and London councils, to develop a plan, so not a strategy so much as an action plan that will really identify the things that need to be happening in London to protect people. And in the meantime, as responsible organisations, we have been taking a number of actions and have just published an annual sort of update monitoring report, which was on our website and on several websites, which is several tens of actions setting out what we've all done. So whether it's updating contact centre staff and responses at Thames Water, to updating communications that London boroughs have done, to make sure that people understand where they need to go, to doing more on sustainable urban drainage. So some of the programmes that the Mayor has been doing have incorporated sustainable urban drainage to understand how we can implement those schemes, where to implement them, and how can we do that whilst improving biodiversity. So these are all actions that can be and that are being carried on whilst we come up with that bigger plan. We are appointing consultants and who will be taking forward that strategy, and we continue to lobby government to understand how we can make sure those responsibilities are really clear, who ought to really have that overarching role for London, and also the funding for that. As you know, local authorities are very strapped for cash. So how do we support them to implement, for example, sustainable urban drainage schemes? One of the things that the Mayor did during the summer was write out to people in basement properties. I think it was about 48,000 this year. Sort of, we've identified, we did the same last year, about 45,000. So part of the exercise was to identify where those people are. So to warn them that they are potentially at risk and what they might need to do in an incident. And along with that, we work with colleagues to make sure that people have good advice as well. So we're doing what we can, but absolutely ramping up what we're trying to do as well.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, you've named the Environment Agency there as a responsible agency. While we've been in this discussion, there's been breaking news that they're failing to even audit water companies properly. Now, I would suggest this is because of significant underinvestment by governments over a long time. Do you have confidence the Environment Agency have the skills and resources able to do what they need to do to support Londoners?
I think it's clear that they have been underfunded for many years. There's a whole host of issues about regulatory authorities and how far and whether they've gone far enough in their duties. I think certainly the relationships that we have in London have been very good at officer level, but we know they can be doing more and should be much tougher, I think, on the areas that they regulate. And it's clear that you see the environmental failings, whether it's in London or outside, that it's not working and it's not right. Whether it's in the Office of Environmental Protection have obviously identified this as an issue. Whether they're strong enough as a regulator themselves is another matter.
Thank you. Returning to the basement properties, earlier I asked you a question. I said this is an example where environment intersects with everything. Myself and the chair earlier this week were on a fire visit where we're in a low-rise building, but one thing that came up over and over again was about personal emergency evacuation plans. I brought this up with Deputy Mayor Twycross before as well, that I'm very concerned about in the event of flooding or overheating, that there are going to be people stuck in buildings, whether that be a basement building or a high-rise with wildfires. The Deputy Mayor has said several times to me it's a council's responsibility to make sure that there's correct personal evacuation plans, but I do wonder if there's a strategic London-wide issue here, that if every council is doing this differently, some councils will do it particularly well, and some councils, because they're stretched, might not do it at all. Are you as concerned as I am about everyone being safe? That's a silly question. Of course, you're as concerned as I am, but what specific actions are you taking to make sure that everyone's okay and not just say this is council's responsibility?
Well, I think through the example is the leaflet. So that was something that that the Mayor funded and issued, but that was developed in conjunction with the London local authorities through London councils, and using information that the London boroughs have provided about where they thought or where they had information on where those basement properties are. So though the London councils, London boroughs are taking this very seriously. Of course, one of the issues that I've highlighted about those different responsibilities is everybody's taking different approaches. So by coming together through this collective endeavour, we're trying to sort of ramp up and get some consistency across the board, and that's really one of the jobs that London Councils does with its member authorities. And then the Environment Agency, Thames Water and ourselves working with London Councils is also trying to do that, so to make sure that everybody has access to the same information and understands, what they need to be doing, for example, in that particular case.
Thank you. That's reassuring. I think the point I'm getting at is that I think PEEPs should be on that agenda, but it sounds like it very much is when the different agencies come together. Cathryn, if I can turn to you. On sustainable urban drainage, obviously this needs significant investment. What do you see your role in that as?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and you're right. I mean, we see sustainable urban drainage as absolutely critical, and one of the main findings, if I remember it, from the review into the London flooding in July 2021 was that we just can't keep building bigger and bigger infrastructure. We can build some, but it's not going to really solve the problem. So we will only create a surface water sustainable city in London with sustainable urban drainage solutions. They're absolutely core. We published our draft drainage water management plan. It's due to be signed off by the Secretary of State, I think, later this calendar year. Alongside the water resource management plan. That drainage water management plan says that we need 7,000 hectares in London to be drained using sustainable urban drainage solutions, and it very much puts forward a SUDS first approach. Now obviously we are not responsible for trying to drain 7,000 hectares of London using sustainable urban drainage, but we do think we've got a really important role to play. And I think part of that role is in actually creating the drainage water management plan. So actually creating that plan and putting it out there. Part of that role is about using our convening power and getting people in a room together to actually work out what the right solutions are. And that obviously we're not unique in that. Others have that role as well, but we do definitely have a role there. And part of it is, in fact, in making investments that we need to make in those sustainable urban drainage solutions where that's appropriate for us. So, our drainage water management plan, for example, envisages something like £19 billion of investment using a SUDS first approach in the next 25 years. That's an incredible change. I mean, that's up from something like £1 billion in the current period. It's an enormous change. So yes, very, very much working with others, using our convening power, but then also very much playing our part and investing our customers' money where that's appropriate as well.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor, just returning to you finally, and then I'll hand back to the Chair. The Mayor has this target for sustainable urban drainage, and I've spoken to him before publicly that I think, I don't just think objectively, he's miles away from it at the moment. There's a huge gap here. How do you deal with the fact that on private land people don't necessarily say if they've got sustainable urban drainage? So how do you track that data? And also, how do you also make sure with the target that councils don't start putting SUDs in certain places that aren't particularly helpful? Like, how do we make sure both the SUDs are effective SUDs and that we're tracking them properly?
Well, we're not direct deliverers, so our role is really to provide the guidance and to identify where things need to change, lobby government for support in some of these areas, whether it's funding or standardising data requirements, for example, from private developers or private landowners. We have our London Plan monitoring database, which monitors strategic developments. So we have some data, and I don't know whether, Dan, you've got any information, but if not, we can certainly write to you on what we have. But then obviously the local planning authorities have that information too. It's sort of the sorts of issues that we raise. So I raised this Rebecca Power, for example, the Minister, issues around funding. We raise the same issues with Cathryn and her colleagues in terms of what the regulator about how there should be funding prioritised for sustainable urban drainage. We provide guidance on where best opportunities are in local authorities, for example, for the creation of SUDs, for dealing with road runoff, for example. So lots and lots of sort of areas that we do operate in, and I should flag that the Mayor commissioned a London Climate Resilience Review, which is incorporating or looking at, so Emma Howard-Boyd, the Chair, is going to be looking at and is looking at currently a whole host of issues, whether it's surface water flooding, heat and flooding, the sort of impacts that we're seeing in London daily, the hot weather that we've just had unusually in September. So we'll be reporting later this year, which will include recommendations on surface water flooding as well.
Thank you. Dan, I don't know if you want to come in now or to write to the committee.
I can just say a couple of brief things. So I think I probably mentioned this last time I was here, but we do to an extent track the SUDs, retrofit SUDs that are out there already. We have a SUDs retrofit map, and we do everything in our power to try and promote that with boroughs. It's got really good coverage of where SUD schemes are being installed, and it includes data about their performance, you know, the size of the schemes, the type of schemes, and it's there partly to track what's being installed and partly there as a tool to really try and influence others to install SUD schemes as well. So that's a key area where we're sort of tracking SUDs, I suppose.
The climate resilient schools, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a whole host of different programmes. I mean, the Mayor's invested close to £30 million in a range of different green and resilient schemes all across London, which includes SUD schemes, sort of swales and surface water drainage schemes and those sorts of things. The Climate Resilient Schools scheme, which is an award-winning scheme, it won a Flood and Coast Award this year, targets up to 100 of the most at-risk schools, at risk of flooding and also at risk of overheating as well, and has installed 600 rainwater planters in those schools to reduce their flood risk. And as I say, that those are in the schools that are at greatest risk of climate change across the capital. And that programme has not only taken those SUDS planter measures to reduce local flood risk in those areas, but it's also produced bespoke climate change adaptation plans for each of those schools can use, so that when they come to spend money on whether it be upgrades to their sort of building fabric or whatever, they can take specific and direct action to help reduce their climate exposure, which includes sort of flood risk and so on as well. And there are a couple of other, I won't go into detail, but there are a couple of other measures that programme has done as well, which is water audits, working with Thames Water as well, and also installed some a weather monitoring network as well, which the school children can use to engage with the climate debate.
With that detail, would you... Oh, sorry.
So I was just saying the point of that was just, why we started the programme was identified, how many lost hours of schooling. It was 22,000, I think. So massive impact. So these are the sorts of things, again, that the Climate Resilience Review is going to be looking at. So, from whether it's lost hours of schooling or impacts on hospitals from hot weather, meaning cancelled operations and so on. So those are the sorts of things that we should be looking out for. And I think Emma will be reporting about, and I'm sure she's been asked to come to before you, I'm sure, to talk about that too.
Perhaps, Dan, thanks very much for adding that detail. I think we'd appreciate it if you could send us the list of those schools where those installations have been made, because obviously that's very helpful in terms of reducing the flood risk in schools and also overheating. 600 rainwater planters and so on and so forth. But of course, this is against the other side of the equation, which is that we know there are still Londoners who are paving over their front gardens and they're putting plastic grass, well, it's not really grass, is it, but it's plastic green surfaces all over their back gardens. So in one sense, we're talking about all of these installations that are improving things, but at the same time, we're still seeing Londoners not understanding the impact on surface water runoff, which is, of course, something that we then turn to Cathryn and all of her staff and say, well, deal with this, and we know what some of the consequences are of massive surface water runoff. Actually, we're going to come back to that later on. I don't know whether we're still sort of, fighting a losing battle here, whether there's more that's being, having plastic or impervious surfaces installed, as opposed to what we're putting in the other direction.
It's a huge challenge. I mean, I think, for every SUDS that we install, there are probably, an equal number of area being converted into AstroTurf front gardens and paving over driveways to park cars and so on. It's definitely a problem. I think one of the things the Deputy Mayor talked about, the surface water strategy. Alongside producing a strategy, there's going to be a communications and engagement plan as part of that as well, and all the partners will be involved, and I think it's going to be critical that it picks up those sorts of messages and communicates that to stakeholders and to Londoners as well.
Well, I'm sure that's something we'll be interested in, because we obviously spent a lot of time communicating with Londoners ourselves. I'm now going to bang the gavel again and just momentarily pause the meeting. And I'd like to thank the Deputy Mayor for being with us for the first two panels. And after this, obviously, if you want to stay, you may. But you may have some other things to do. I'm going to restart today's meeting of the Environment Committee, and I'd like to welcome everybody back to this meeting. And can I thank Cathryn Ross and Daniel Bicknell, who have stayed from the previous panel, but I'd now like to welcome Roger Bailey, who is the Chief Technical Officer at Tideway. You're very welcome. And also Joe Pecorelli, who's the Conservation Programme Manager from the Zoological Society of London, better known as London Zoo, I think, to most people, but ZSL is what we'll call you today. Thank you very much for joining us. We have a series of different questions, and we're going to start with a few questions actually from me, which we had hoped to put to the Environment Agency, but unfortunately we were at the last minute. The London Regional Director has pulled out due to illness. So I'm going to ask you, Dan, if I may, some questions about the Thames Barrier. We are going to be having a session where we visit the Thames with the Environment Agency. We will be on a boat. We will ask those questions, and there will be no possibility of the Environment Agency getting away at that point, because we'll all be floating down the middle of the river. So we're all looking forward to that as the substitute. And we will also probably write to the Environment Agency. But in the meantime, if you are able to comment on this, because obviously you have this climate adaptation role, the current proposals for replacing the Thames Barrier are for a new structure to be built by 2070. Are you confident that it will be built by then? And will the existing structure continue to be effective up until 2070? Because we're using it quite a lot more than we'd originally planned.
Yeah, there's a few things there. I mean, it is being used more than it was intended to be used.
Yeah.
It's being used at the moment, as I understand it, for fluvial river flooding in West London, because it protects a number of homes or an area of West London by holding back the tide. I think the Environment Agency view is very much that that's not sustainable in the long term. The idea is the barrier shouldn't close more than 50 times per year, and with climate change and increasing number of predicted storm surges, that's likely to need to increase, and therefore it's not sustainable to keep closing it for smaller order flood events in West London. And I know they're very much looking at alternative ways of protecting those properties without using the Thames Barrier, and it's because of wear and tear. Really, the Thames Barrier can't be used any more than that without creating an increased risk of taking it out of action. That said, the barrier is expected to protect London until 2070 and beyond, and I think there are probably question marks about, how could it be used in conjunction with any future barrier potentially as part of that process. But the updated Thames Estuary 2100 plan is still working to the date of 2070, and it is looking at 3 different locations for potentially siting a new barrier. One of them being at the existing site, and there are a couple of other potential locations they're looking at as well. I think the Longreach location further east is quite widely known to be a preferred site, but there is another site potentially further out as well. I think the other thing to say is the Thames Barrier is but one piece. It's the kind of showpiece in a larger system of integrated defences that includes thousands of smaller defences. And the key thing here is you need to raise them all kind of in unison, if you like, at the right time in order to continue to protect London. And I think one of the really interesting findings that came out of the 10-year review is a case in point about accelerated climate change, actually, which is that the last plan was produced in 2012 and made assumptions about sea level rise then. The 10-year review, just 10 years on, has found that sea level rise is accelerating and therefore not accelerating at the rate that was expected in 2012. Fortunately, that plan is adaptive and therefore it's within the boundaries that the plan set out, and so there is a plan in place to deal with those that accelerated sea level rise. But nevertheless, it does mean that some of the defences need to be raised 15 years earlier than predicted just 10 years ago, which is, I think, quite a stark statistic. And, people talk about, where are the concrete examples of an acceleration of climate change? And we know anecdotally from what we see outside of our window in the last couple of years. But this is a well-respected concrete example of an acceleration of climate change beyond what was predicted just 10 years ago.
Yes, I think the expression tipping point is used quite a lot, but it is quite apparent that there are very many changes and things just moving so quickly around climate just this year. absolutely every continent there's been something going on, and every single day there's something new being announced. There's no water in the Panama Canal because there's a drought, being merely the latest of many announcements this year. Can I just come to the point, first of all, that you were making about tackling the fluvial flooding? So if the existing Thames Barrier is not going to go up and down to deal with that, how is it going to be dealt with instead, or will there be some other consequences for people who live and work in that part of London that might be impacted? I'm hoping you're going to say no to that last question.
I think what I'm going to do is say pass and say it's for that boat trip when they can't escape. But I think there is a plan in place, and a strategy for West London. I think it's part of the Lower Thames scheme, but I don't want to say too much because this probably is Charlie Wood's domain. And they certainly won't be stopping using the barrier unless they have a credible plan in place to protect those properties.
Okay, so we're not talking about stopping using it come
See
what may.
Happens, no.
Okay, right, okay. Because I wasn't quite sure, because you seem to be saying it can't go up and down this frequently, and we're not going to stop doing it until we've got another solution.
What I imagine will happen with it'll be phased out once there's a solution in place.
Okay, definitely one for the boat then. The other thing that you mentioned was the Thames 2100 plan, which actually I think the original consultation and discussions were launched here. The investment strategy has not yet been published. Do you know when that's likely to emerge, or it's not going to be published until several years' time? That seems quite strange. Why would that be? Do you know what's likely to be included?
So I think I'll probably try and answer this as the GLA rather than the Environment Agency. And I think it's to some extent it's a concern that but I do know that there is an investment strategy working group looking at this at the moment. I don't have the details of the date of publication. It's hugely important. I think that there's it's a very credible plan. It's a sort of world-leading plan in many ways, particularly around the adaptive pathways approach. But I think many people would say maybe there hasn't been enough progress in the last 10 years in delivering it. I think as you see certain sort of key milestones coming towards you and actually getting closer because of the acceleration of climate change, it becomes really important that we have a funding strategy there to deal with it. There are other things as well that really need to be considered around the plan. As it stands, it's a partnership plan. It's not the Environment Agency's sole responsibility to deliver that plan. No. The Mayor has a role, boroughs have a role, the private sector has a role. All the beneficiaries that benefit from the Thames Tidal Defences protecting London and the billions worth of assets all have a role in delivering that plan. It's really challenging, though, to get people to collaborate at the speed that's necessary. And I think there are probably questions that need to be asked around, should that plan carry more weight? Should it be made statutory? Should government look at ways of ensuring that, it is critical infrastructure that needs to be delivered?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think we're, a number of different areas that we've touched on so far today, and we've said, there are a huge number of players that come together in the use of the river for energy, or the use of the river for freight and people moving up and down it for leisure, pleasure, or for commercial. How do you deal with water, surface water, when it's moving around? Is that the responsibility of, the fire brigade to clear it up if it's dangerous, councils to stop it from happening, Thames Water to make sure it goes somewhere else so that no one can do, there are some complex issues here with a very large number of players. One of the things I will be asking Charlie Woods is about the safeguarding of the sites that are being considered, because obviously it would then be very difficult to build the barrier if the sites that may be involved are not safeguarded. And the point about putting the plan on a statutory basis, I think is very well made. However, I think these are all ones for the boat, and possibly writing to her. Thank you very much, Dan, for answering those questions. I'm now going to hand over further questioning we're going to start with Assembly Member Joanne McCartney, who wants to ask more about water quality and sewerage.
Yes, thank you. And Mr. Piccarelli, if I could start with you, please. Can I ask, how would you assess the current state of the water quality in London's rivers? And you will have to press the button in front of you to turn your microphone on.
Well, by the latest WFD categories. They all fail. There's 11 management catchments, 47 water bodies, and they're all classed as failing. So if we dig into that, I mean, those categorisations were made based on new chemicals coming online as part of the monitoring, but there are gross problems with connectivity to the foul sewers. So the very high-profile issue at the moment is CSOs, and I'm sure Cathryn can talk more about that shortly. But actually, in London, there's other issues that are equally damaging, or it's difficult to apportion across the different sources. But
I don't like to interrupt, but we haven't talked about combined sewer overflows, CSOs, today, so I'm just going to unpack that for anyone who's listening who's not as up with the terminology as we are. Thank you.
They are permitted discharges to the river. So when the sewers are supercharged, they overflow to the nearest river. And there's 306 that have got event duration monitors on, and there's 196 that are known about that are yet to have event duration monitors on. But yeah, so CSOs are the kind of there's a government plan to reduce the impact of those. But actually, in London, a really big problem is the connectivity with the surface water drainage network. So we have two networks in London, the combined. So where it's rainwater and foul is meant to go into the same. And generally in the outskirts, there's separate drainage, surface and foul, and there's connectivity where there shouldn't be between. It's a problem both ways: infiltration, surface to foul, because you get inundation of sewage treatment works. But the other way, it goes into the rivers, and there's really sort of three main areas there. There's dilapidated, so failing assets causing sewage to go into our rivers, and there's misconnections, either deliberate or accidental, and it's estimated about 5% of properties across London have misconnected plumbing. And there is a third that has escaped me for a second, but I'm sure I'll remember in a second. But basically, if we look at the water quality in rivers, to get an accurate picture, you need to have real-time monitoring, which is what we've done at ZSL recently. So you put a bit of kit in a river, and it shows you after rainfall that you get spikes in ammonia, which is invariably from the foul sewers. So it's capacity issues, failures, asset problems that's causing that ammonia to go into rivers. And if you look at certainly in north-east London, or tributaries of the Lee, tributaries of the Brent, upper tributaries of the Crane seem to be in a particularly poor state. So levels of 2 ppm ammonium, 2 parts per million, ammonia. In the Yeddingbrook, for instance, we've just done a study on that, and that's a slowly rising curve. It's a line, rather, if you plot Environment Agency data over the last 20 years, and it's one of, well, that's for other questions, isn't it? It's going the wrong way.
It obviously has a great impact on wildlife and biodiversity.
Yeah, absolutely. Ammonia is directly toxic to wildlife.
Yeah.
But
you talked about the monitoring, and that you've done monitoring. I'm going to ask Cathryn about her discharge monitoring shortly. But you said 196 rivers as yet don't have.
That was referring to CSOs, so combined sewer overflows. Okay, so there's but that's more Cathryn's domain. That's their network.
Fine. Okay, lovely. And can I ask, it's obviously getting worse, and we know that climate change means we have more flash flooding, particularly with CSOs. That's a real issue. But are there other factors that you put it down to why it's getting worse? Is it about lack of action from government or other issues?
Oh gosh, why is it getting worse? Well, the problems are, it's complicated. Clearly there are problems with maintenance of keeping foul out of the surface water network. And as I say, that's manifesting itself most in North London. So that's one area. So about a credible long-term investment strategy. And that's why the drainage wastewater management plan is coming online, but it's very, very late for the nature of our rivers, which are, has been decimated in those tributaries I mentioned. So that's one area. It's obviously linked to the SUDs and the complexities of installing SUDs. We need a much more porous city, because it's not just about the water quality, it's about the way it interacts with our rivers, in that we get water moving very rapidly from hard paved surfaces into rivers, scouring them through all our rivers. It's not just a water quality issue. It's a lack of habitat. Our 600 kilometres of surface water through London has been buried and squashed. So that's another issue related. So in terms of the causes, you're asking about the causes.
Yeah, I'm wondering, that's really useful. I'm wondering if there's any regulatory causes as well. We're obviously going to ask the Environment Agency when we see them about their enforcement activity. But I noticed there's stories today about, for example, we're not keeping up with EU regulations with regards to...
clearly we're not keeping up, because...
Well, we're not in there, yes, but I think there was a promise before that we would keep step.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, WFD's been moved over, hasn't it? And as I said right at the top, all 47 water bodies in London fail their chemical status. Yeah. So that speaks for itself. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I might come back to you shortly. But Thames Water, Cathryn, can I come to you if I can? And can I just thank you for writing to me, because I did raise the River Lee with you on the last occasion you were in front of us, and you sent us a letter saying that in the next 2 years you will be doubling investment into sewage treatment works and sewage treatment works and sewers. And so, but what I didn't get from that letter, welcome though it was what impact that increased investment would have. Will we see better water quality in the River Lee, for example, once this investment is in, and will we see fewer discharges, and can you quantify what you expect those to be?
I think the short answer is not off the top of my head, but we can write back to you with more detail in terms of what exactly we're doing and when we're planning to do it, and as you say, what the expected impact of that is. I'm confident to say that it will improve the water quality in the River Lee, because that's why we're doing it, but exactly what schemes will deliver what improvement, I'll have to write back on. That
would be helpful. Thank you very much. I also noticed, if I can, from a story from the BBC, who I think had done some FOIs to various water companies, that actually they thought that discharges from Thames Water were probably underreported, because you only monitor 62% of your overflow points, compared to, example, with its 98% for Southern Water. Now, I know that you're a much larger water company, but do you have plans to increase the number, so therefore the monitoring of your overflow points in London?
Yes, we do. And again, I'll have to write back to you on this, but we do have an EDM rollout programme.
Yeah, I've seen your map.
Yep, and we're planning on rolling out more of those monitors. And again, I can write back to you and say to you where those additional monitors will go and when we're expecting them to go in.
Okay, fine. And then I also noted that Thames Water, amongst others, for example, figures for last year show that there were illegal dry spillages, which is in periods of dry weather. Thames Water is still pumping out raw sewage into rivers, which therefore leads to a higher concentration if it's not going out when it's raining, for example. So I'm just wondering, in your scheme of investment or priorities, is that sort of top of the list to prevent those?
I think when we're looking at where to make investment, what we're trying to do is put the investment where it's going to have the biggest impact. So some of those dry weather flows are actually very, very small. So we might be able to make a bigger improvement by putting the investment somewhere else where there's actually more spills happening. There is something I ought to say about dry weather flows, just for the sake of accuracy. So there are reasons why dry weather flows happen, and actually there are some in our patch that do create dry weather flows. It's very counterintuitive because everybody knows now, because of all the publicity about it, that when it rains heavily, the system is designed to spill the excess into rivers, and we know we don't like that, but that's how it's designed. And so it's very counterintuitive when people understand that there's spills coming from sewage treatment works when it's been dry. There are, broadly speaking, two reasons a lot of the time why that is the case. One is where we have very long, not very steep gradient outfall pipes out of the sewage treatment works into the river. And we have a few of those, mostly in Thames Valley rather than in London. But what this means is that there's quite often the rain stops and there's stuff in the pipe, and the stuff in the pipe is flowing through the pipe, and it sort of dribbles out to the end of the pipe, and that is a dry weather flow because it's entered the river not during a period of rain, but it's just the impact of stuff being in a pipe and gravity. And then the other, which actually Joe referred to, is sometimes we do get misconnections. And again, that shouldn't happen, but again, it can cause dry weather flow. So we do need to look at the reasons why we are discharging into rivers. We have a programme of work that is looking at all of our sewage treatment works and looking at discharge. And as part of that work, that will enable us to target the investment that we do make, and crucially the investment that we're planning to make in our next 5-year plan in those areas where it's actually going to have the biggest improvement, which will include some dry weather flows, but it will also include some of the normal storm discharges.
Thank you, that's really helpful. And then on the issues about misconnections and pollution from storm overflows, what other measures are you putting in place?
Yeah, I mean, misconnections are a huge issue for us. And Joe mentioned it might be 1 in 5 properties. I mean, I think our stats is it might even be 1 in 10 in London that are misconnected. It's a huge number. And in fact, since 2020, we've dealt with more than 12,000 misconnections. Including by working in partnership with London boroughs, because quite often it's people on the ground. And in fact, we did a programme with ZSL, I think, outfall safaris, I think. But the reason that was so important was because actually the best way to tell when there's misconnections is actually to look at the outfall and see what's coming out. And broadly speaking, if it's got soap suds in it, it probably shouldn't be there. So we could actually learn quite a lot by getting people on the ground to help us find these things. We've also made it easier for people to report those things to us. We have a hotline that enables people to report things that they shouldn't be seeing, and then that enables us to go on and investigate. So on misconnections, it's really difficult because it is often quite local and quite sort of individual properties. But it is something we are targeting by working in partnership with others, including local community groups.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm just going to bring in Assemblymember Polansky, who's got an additional question now.
Thank you. Cathryn, when people think about the state of our rivers, I think the theme of today has been underinvestment, crumbling infrastructure, but I'd also add to that historic profiteering, and I think Thames Water has been one of the worst culprits. We've discussed before, £7.2 billion paid out over 33 years of privatisation. Now, the shareholders have made new funding commitments. They've said they'll put £1.5 billion into the firm. They put £500 million last year. Now, £1 billion was meant to be this year, but the shareholders have actually only put £750 million in. Can you explain the shortfall of £250 million?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just take a step back and give you the bigger picture, and then I can explain why the 750 is 750. So we had a commitment from our shareholders to put in £500 million. They delivered on that £500 million in March, so we got that. Thank you very much. Very helpful. We were then talking about an additional £1 billion in AMP7. What we're actually now talking about, you're right, is an additional £750 million in AMP7, but we are now also talking about, indicatively, because it depends on our AMP8 plan, our next 5-year plan, an additional £2.5 billion coming in from our shareholders. So actually, overall, the amount of shareholder support in prospect is now 500 plus 750 plus 2.5 billion. It's just that £250,000 of that has been phased from AMP7 into AMP8. And broadly, the reason for that is that we are delivering less in AMP7 than we originally planned to do. And the basic reason for that is, and this will be familiar, our CapEx programme in AMP7 ended up being back-end loaded. So we did very, very little in the first 2 years of the current control period. That is entirely on us. That is totally our fault. And we've been ramping up our ability to deliver the capital programme, but it's meant that it's been back-end loaded. And because it's been back-end loaded, at a time of high inflation, everything is just costing way more than it should have done had we delivered it at the beginning of the control period. Now, again, that is on us. But what it means is we've got the ability to deliver a little bit less in this control period than we were originally planning to do, but we're going to make that up in the first year of the next control period, which is why the 250 million that we had originally expected to get from shareholders for the remainder of AMP7 is now bundled in with a bigger amount, 2.5 billion, that we're going to be getting in AMP8. It's a phasing issue rather than it not being available.
£250 million is a huge shortfall. Can you guarantee, customers won't be making up those funds and it will be coming from shareholders?
Yes.
Okay. And then I think you've just answered this, but just in case, it's 5 years till 2030, and in that's for £2.5 billion extra commitment. Again, is that going to come from shareholders rather than customers?
Yes, that is an indicative amount, because obviously it depends on how big the plan ends up being when we've gone through the regulatory process for the next control period. But yes, indicatively, shareholders said that they are prepared to make available £2.5 billion from them in the middle of AMP8, which is actually when we would need it given the capital programme.
And so, indicatively, are you agreeing with the principle that even if it becomes more, that money should come from shareholders rather than Londoners?
Well, I don't know quite what that means. I mean, I think we've got the money that we have been told that we can expect from shareholders. That will come from shareholders. Exactly how much that ends up being depends on the regulatory process that we're going to go through in PR24. There will still need to be, and I'm sorry to say it, but there will still need to be a bill increase in the next control period in order to fund the additional investment that is needed. But we're in the very fortunate position that our shareholders are in fact prepared to put their own cash into the business. And that comes, as you know, we've talked about this before, but that comes on the back of 6 years where they haven't taken any income out of the business. And so there's actually really quite a considerable degree of support coming in from our shareholders for the future investment programme.
I'll try one more time because I sense the Chair will get impatient with me, but I think we differ and part company on this bill increase because you've accepted that this was partly or fully Thames Water's fault, not being quick enough, and it being front-loaded. So why should customers have to pick up that money? Surely shareholders, again, who have been profiteering £7.2 billion in 33 years, should be picking up the bill.
Let me be really, really clear. So when I was talking about us ending up spending more money in this control period, this current control period, to deliver the stuff that we have to deliver in this control period, customers will not pay more for delivery in this control period beyond what we were allowed to recover in the 2019 price review. That will not happen because there is no mechanism for Ofwat to increase bills beyond what they determined in the 2019 price review. So to the extent that that delivery costs us more in this price control period, then that is on the company and it's ultimately on our shareholders. That's how the regulatory regime works. What I am saying, though, is if you look at the next 5-year period and the level of investment that we are required to make and what we now know about the costs of delivering things, if you crank all that through a business planning process, what that does suggest is that there will need to be a bill increase to pay for that additional future investment that customers have not already paid for in this period.
I don't think Londoners will accept that, but that's a story we'll continue to tell. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm now going to pass over to Assembly Member Bakari, one of whose questions I think might also have to wait for the boat, but I'm sure the other question is something that everyone is going to want to comment on.
Thank you. I want to go back to effluence again. I have also received a letter from you, Cathryn, and I do want to thank you for your engagement with us because it's great practice that you're willing to engage and answer these questions. And my letter was about the Teddington scheme, where residents have raised quite a lot of concerns, and I had the pleasure of meeting campaigners recently. Now, Thames Water did decide to scrap a proposal of a new water transfer from River 7 on the Thames, an option that had received a lot of public support because of its heritage. But why is Thames Water determined to plough ahead with the Teddington DRA? And whilst there are other alternatives that have public support, as stated by environmental groups, and yet you are determined to carry on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the first thing to say is we absolutely do recognise the strength of feeling in the local area, and it's been interesting to engage with people and to hear their views, and there's definitely a very strong set of views coming from folk in Teddington about the DRA scheme. I mean, as I think you know, the Teddington scheme is part of our water resource management plan. And our water resource management plan, the way we do those plans is quite tightly prescribed by DEFRA, by the Environment Agency and by Ofwat. And what we have to do is we have to deliver security of supply to our customers over the next 25-year period. And we have to do that using what they call an adaptive planning approach. So we don't have to be absolutely certain about what the future will hold. What we have to do is commit in the next 5 years to doing things that we should be doing on a no regrets basis, given the probable likely futures we might face. That's basically what we do. And what we have to then do is we have to look at what the best value set of options are that we should be pursuing over the next 5 years in that context. And that planning process has basically led us to rely very, very heavily on demand management and demand reductions, and something like 80% of the future water need that we actually need to deliver over the next 25 years is actually coming from reductions in demand. So we're leaning very heavily on demand management. But it does also show that we need a new strategic resource for the whole of the South East. So that is the reservoir near Abingdon. And that will supply 50% of the water from that will supply Thames water customers. I think it's about 35% will supply Southern water customers, and about 15% will supply Affinity water customers, I think, now. But you're right, the third scheme that best value adaptive planning approach picks up is the Teddington DRA
But even you were surprised by that when at the last meeting you said, "Oh, I didn't actually expect that," and that triggered, a thought in me in thinking, well, actually there could be other options then.
Yeah, no, I mean, the reason, the point that I made at the last meeting was that one of the reasons I thought people were actually picking up quite strongly on the point about engagement on Teddington was that if you go back sort of a year or two, the scheme that we had been considering perhaps in preference to Teddington was actually a similar scheme at Beckton. And that ended up not being preferred when we went through the best value planning process as we're required to do through the water resource management
Let's talk about the best value aspect of this, because there are some concerns about that and the definition of what best value is. Because as far as we know, there's not been an environmental impact assessment, and there's no plans to complete one for 2 years. And you've not done a social and health impact assessment. And this is this is a part of the Thames which is incredibly popular for leisure usage. When I was there, it was jam-packed with swimmers and canoeists and boaters and people who use that river. Literally, in the river, they are swimming in that river.
Yes, no, I completely do understand that. I mean, so again, to recap, the water resource management plan that we are in the draft stages of at the moment sets out in some detail what we're proposing to do over the next 5-year period, so 2025 to 2030. The Teddington DRA scheme isn't a scheme that we would actually deliver until the final year of that 5-year period, so it will come in 2029, 2030. And that's why we're actually still at a fairly early stage in terms of the work that needs to be done to design the scheme, to scope the scheme out, to look at the impact of it, to make sure that we can mitigate the impact, etc., etc. And that's because the scheme isn't going to be delivered until 2029, 2030. So don't worry that we're not going to do those things. We are going to do all of those things. It just doesn't make sense to do them in 2023.
Okay. So I'm just going to wrap it up with, will you come and meet the campaigners? They are good. Good. I'm glad you will.
Yes.
And I'm sure they'll be keen to see whether you'll take a dip as well. Would you take a dip in effluent, though? Would you do it in treated sewage water?
I would do it yes, I would take a dip in a river where we had discharged fully treated effluent.
Interesting. Okay, so on Tuesday, the Office of Environmental Protection said the government and the regulators may have broken the law over how it regulates sewage releases. So how can the residents really trust you and water companies, or even the government, when its own UK environment watchdog doesn't?
I really can't comment on the OEP's investigation into government and regulators. I'm sorry.
Well, then I will go to Dan. And hopefully he can just give me a little bit of information on what you already know from the Environment Agency, because there has been some findings of criminal investigations into activity of wastewater treatment works to be made public, and you may have some information on this, and what are some of those issues that have been identified, if you can share anything.
I'm probably not going to reveal anything new here, actually, around those kind of criminal claims and so on. I think we did touch on one potential issue a while ago, though, which is I don't think it's a big secret. Maybe not everyone agrees, but I do think the Environment Agency has been defunded over several years. I think it's on record that that's the case, and it's on record publicly that that's had an impact on investigations, on enforcement. I think if you defund any agency that has such a key responsibility in tracking pollution incidents, it's likely to have an impact. And unfortunately, I think that's probably what we've seen here.
Thank you. Finally, we're going to turn to talking about the Thames Tideway Tunnel, and I'm going to bring in Assembly Member Baker, and obviously we're all hoping that that's going to have a pretty large impact on CSOs, effluent and all the other things getting into the river. Assembly Member Baker.
Thanks, Chair. No, good morning. No, not even remotely. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I've lost track of the day. Yes, just got a couple of questions on an update on the Thames Tideway Tunnel. But I wonder whether, given we've had such a discussion about the quality of water and sewage and everything like that, I wonder whether you could outline what the benefits are that the tunnel will bring before I ask you to give a bit of an update on completion of things.
I'd love to give some good news. Thank you very much. Yes, well, Joe mentioned the 196, or I think it's CSOs across London. 55 of them are in the tidal Thames, and 36 of them are going to be effectively taken out of service by us next year. So we are 90% of the way through our construction. We're coming towards the end of that process. We're starting commissioning in the spring of next year, and when we start commissioning, we'll be cleaning up the river, and then we'll be completely providing the full environmental benefits by 2025, and that will mean that 95% of the volume of sewage that's going through the system currently now will be taken off into our tunnel and treated through the Beckton sewage treatment works. And that, if you go back to 2014, because I think this is you remember there's a lot of rainfall in 2014, 65 million tonnes of sewage went into the river in 2014. If all of the London Tideway improvements, which is the Thames Tideway Tunnel, the Lee Tunnel, and all the sewage treatment works that Thames Water has improved, if all of that was operating in 2014, 2.5 million tonnes would have gone through. So that is the benefit, a huge reduction. And what that means is that the river is now protected really sort of forevermore against those spikes of oxygen that Joe was talking about that can kill fish and cause environmental damage in the river. That won't happen along the tidal Thames other than in exceptional circumstances. And when it does happen, it won't be as severe, which I can explain. Also, as climate change comes upon us and temperatures go up, so the effect of sewage in rivers is worse because the temperature of the rivers is higher, and our system takes that out and it provides an enhanced sort of protection from that effect as the climate goes further forward. Furthermore, I'm sure many of us have been on the foreshore and picked out nasties out of the river. From sort of next year, and as we move forward to full operational, sort of the amount of operational sort of activities, the amount of sewage-derived litter that goes into the river will dramatically reduce from those CSOs in the tidal Thames. I mean, there may be other sources of it that need to be looked at, and actually those sources will probably come into stark sort of contrast, because everything else will have gone, which is great. But the fact is, if you go and start picking out wet wipes out of the reefs that exist now, at the moment, they're getting full up the next time there's a storm. That won't happen from next year. And so hopefully that will enable us to sort of engage with the river and clean it up and sort of take a different approach to it. So those are some of the benefits I think we're going to see going forward. And just as a snapshot, I have other projects that we aren't the only combined sewer system in the world. There's many. And I remember many years ago going to Portland in Oregon and seeing that, and a dramatic re-engagement of the people of that city with their river after they did a similar system to ours, quite a lot smaller, but nevertheless it was significant. And that system also, given what we've been talking about with SUDS, they had a huge program of incentivising homeowners to what they call downspout disconnection, so that they created a porous city, and they incentivise people to do that.
Thanks, that's really helpful. Thank you. It gives us a real opportunity there. Could you just say, when you said exceptional circumstances, when there might not be able to take everything out? I do appreciate there are exceptional circumstances, but how exceptional would that be?
Well, the system is designed to take to capture a storm that's 1.6 million cubic meters. So it's a transfer and storage tunnel. Okay. So if a very large storm comes along that's bigger than that, then there will be some residual overflow. That happens maybe 4 or 5 times in a typical year. And we say a typical year, but you know that may change with climate change, obviously going forward. Now the benefit is that the worst part of a storm, and where I think one of my colleagues in the environment described it as chewy sausage type of sewage comes out into the river, which does occasionally happen. That's the first flush of a sewage system that's, if it's been sat there, sort of doing nothing in a dry weather in the summer for a while, and then there's a storm, what comes out first into the river is really, really damaging. Okay, that will always get caught by the tunnel going forward. And what will then end up in the residual amount is a more dilute form of overflow when the tunnel is full. Okay, then quickly the tunnel will start to be pumped out through the sewage treatment works, and capacity will come again. And if another storm comes in behind that one, it'll get captured in the tunnel again. So it doesn't capture 100%. So even in that year, I mentioned 65 million tonnes, 2.5 million tonnes still went into the river. Yeah. But that was over, that would have been the last flush of a storm, not the first flush. And maybe over several events in that modelling, how that was modelled. So it's not going to have the same damage as it would do if it went straight out into a warm river in the middle of summer. I hope that answers your question. By the way, if you were going to capture 100%, we'd have to have 2 tunnels, effectively. And it would have cost, twice or 3 times as much and taken a lot longer. So this is the right size for the problem that we have.
Understood. Just wanted clarification on what that meant, but yes. So in terms of an update, the tunnel was originally intended for completion next year, but will now be fully operational in 2025. And those were delays due entirely to COVID. Or is there anything else that caused those delays?
Not entirely to COVID. Yeah. We've had a sort of delay of around about 6 months due to COVID. Yeah. But we're not going to be late on our sort of regulatory date, which is February 27, and that February 27 date of final completion, which is when we pass the tunnel fully over to Thames Water, what we call acceptance. Right. There's various steps in the process. There's a start of commissioning in 2024. There's handover to Thames Water in 2025, which is full operational. Then there's acceptance in 2027, which is the end of the project.
Right.
Okay, at that point of 2027 was extended by 6 months because of COVID, and the other dates that we've got for our operational and our completion and our start of commissioning, we've always had stretch dates on those. We've always wanted to get this project completed and out there and benefiting the river, benefiting London as quickly as possible. And so that date is maybe a bit later than some of the dates we've put out there. But yeah, that year that you mentioned, half of that would be down to COVID, and other half other things. And we've had, as you can imagine, a major project through London, 20 odd sites across London, lots of Victorian infrastructure. In fact, lots of things happened to us where we didn't do investigations during the planning stage because we didn't want to disrupt Londoners, and that came back and caused us some problems in the implementation because we made sensible assumptions to avoid digging up Blackfriars Underpass or to avoid causing problems to people living next to some of our sites as well with noise and vibration, that sort of thing. And that's a decision we took, and that's what happens. But that did result in some delays.
Understood. Thank you. And so the date of the 2025 date where it's fully operational but not yet. I like the idea that Thames Water effectively get to test it out for 2 years before they decide whether it's actually theirs or not. That sounds like that is. But I'm sure it's a complicated contract thing that I don't understand. But how confident are you of that 2025 date being fully operational? Are you expecting any further delays on that?
We're confident. There's obviously uncertainties in everything. I mean, one of the uncertainties actually is the weather, if it doesn't rain, we can't necessarily test the system. That will take a bit longer. If we get lots of rain at the right time, then we could, so those are the sort of things. But we're on track. There's been huge collaboration between Thames Water and ourselves, and a great coming together of our teams and our alliance of contractors that's building the project. And we're confident that we're on track.
Thanks. And my final question is about the cost. So the latest annual report shows the forecast costs are above original estimates, so 4.3 billion compared to 3.5. Is that due to a proportion of that due to delays, presumably, that you've outlined before?
Yes. So of the billion that you mentioned there, there's around sort of 180 million of that is due to COVID. Directly due to COVID. 230 million of that is due to some of the problems that I mentioned before, Victorian infrastructure and difficulty on some of our sites where unforeseen ground conditions were very serious and involved quite a significant change of methodologies and programs and things like that. We also took a decision to increase what we call our More by River policy. So our project has got 8 million tonnes of material in and out. So to build it, building materials in segments to build the tunnel, that sort of thing, and spoil coming out of the ground and going away to rain and marshes or wherever coming out. So 6 million tonnes of material coming out, and that kept sort of hundreds of thousands of lorries off London's roads. In fact, 43 million kilometres, road kilometres, was reduced to 12 million as a result of our policy to move by river. So we built a lot of wharves, and we increased that and spent an additional £50 million over and above what was in our original budget to do the right thing, and to bring in sort of wharves on Deptford Creek and in other places, and to extend the materials that we were bringing in by river, because we decided that was the right thing to do, and it has paid dividends. Our river transport strategy has been very successful. It's gone very well. We reached our peak in 2019, and that's been very successful. The final thing on that, sorry, I got diverted a little bit on that, but the final thing on that list of items that contributed to the increase is obviously inflation. So we allow inflation in our original budget, but it was something in the region of 120 plus million pounds of inflation literally in the last few years as an excess to that. So those are the main items. There'll be a few other items in there, but those have contributed to that increase. However, when we started this project back in 2016, we said it would cost £20 to £25 in 2014 prices on the typical average bill, and today in 2014 prices this year it's 17, so it's less than that. So despite the additional costs, which are important and we need to keep those in mind and under control, because of our financing and other financial management, the actual cost to the bill payer is less than what we said. And in real terms, it actually is £25. So I should say that because of inflation and everything. But if you like with like, we said 20 to 25, and it's 17. It's predicted to go down to 15 in the next 2 or 3 years. So I think that's a major, overall, if you look at this, it's a major success.
And finally, do you expect there to be any additional cost pressures? Are you expecting any more from those categories that you've outlined? Are you confident on that?
Well, there are always uncertainties.
Yeah.
Okay. But I don't think we are not going to be breaching the £20 to £25 sort of 2014 price. That's extremely unlikely. Yeah.
But in terms of the estimates that are in the annual report,
well, the uncertainties, I can't say we're not going to have any increases. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
No. But
you know,
are you expecting any?
No,
I'm not asking you to get your. I promise I'm not asking you to get your crystal ball out.
I don't think
you don't know what's around everything that's around the corner. We couldn't have predicted COVID and inflation and everything like that.
There's nothing significant anticipated, but we're not complacent, and we have to be alive to uncertainties out there.
Understood. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Assembly Member Baker. I've just got a couple more from me. One is for Cathryn. Obviously, I think this is a great project for dealing with the sewage, and I know you call it a tunnel, but I call it a sewer. You can call it a super sewer. I love the idea of something so enormous is going to deal with the fact that our sewers currently are way too small for the number of people that live in London. Bazalgette was obviously a genius, but I think he was catering for 2 million Londoners, and there's nearly 8 million of us. Four. That's
he was
right.
Catering. There were 2 million in the city. He designed for 4.
He planned ahead.
Yeah.
So I think this is very much in that theme. But of course, it deals with the issues relating to the Thames. There are issues and overflows that go into the other rivers around London. And I'm going to use as an example one that I've visited with Thames Water, Richard Aylard and various other people, the Beddington treatment works. And obviously, if there's a sudden storm, there is the same issue. But obviously, in that case, it relates to my local river, the Wandle, which in its upper reaches is, of course, itself a chalk stream. What are we putting in place to deal with that sort of storm overflow that might afflict some of the other rivers in London beyond the fantastic work on the super sewer in the Thames?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and maybe we should talk a little bit more about that when we're in the middle of the price review process, and we can talk about what's coming through in the next control period. But it is a multi-pronged approach, as you'd expect me to say. And one of the things we are very focused on at the moment is actually a holistic approach to driving down pollution. So obviously storm overflows is one driver of pollution. There are others too, but we're really, really focused on trying to drive down pollutions. And when you start to sort of think about how you do that, you quite quickly conclude that there's an awful lot that you need to look at. So we've already talked about misconnections. Blockages is a really huge driver of pollutions. We have something like 75,000 blockages every single year. We know that something like 40% of our pollution incidents are caused by blockages that related to fats and wet wipes. Yeah? So all of that has a massive beneficial impact. We also know that when we are talking about our assets and our assets' contribution to pollutions, we need to think differently about our treatment works and about our networks, because they both actually contribute to pollution. So we need to address both of those two things. So actually, we do need to invest in upgrading our sewage treatment works. And if you're particularly interested in what we're planning to do at Beddington, I can write back to you and see what we're planning to do on Beddington.
Thank you. That would be good.
But we also need to focus on how we manage our network. And I think networks in particular are a big driver of pollution incidents in London. So actually better operational management of those networks is really important. So we have a massive programme, for example, to install sewer depth monitors across our network. Now, in this control period, this 5-year period, we've installed nearly 20,000 of them. In the next control period, we're looking to install more than 30,000. That's really, really important, because that gives us real-time information in advance of where a risk of a pollution may occur, because we can see what's actually happening in our network, and it means we can be proactive, we can get on top of it. We're putting a lot of effort into the Mogden catchment there. We're using that as a sort of pilot project to try and digitise that whole area to see what we can actually do in terms of changing the way we operate the network. We do obviously also need to invest in upgrading some of our sewage treatment works and creating additional capacity and more storm tanks and things like that. But I think it's only when you start to think about, well, what are we actually really trying to achieve here? We're actually trying to improve the health of our rivers and our waterways. Well, what are the root causes of threats to that river health? Okay, what do we need to do to get the best bang for buck and deliver the maximum improvement we can? Then you end up with this multi-pronged approach, and that's what we're doing, and that's what we're carrying through from our work over the next couple of years into our plan between 2025 and 2030, which we're going to be submitting to Ofwat next month.
Well, hopefully we'll be looking forward to seeing that in due course. And you're quite right. In that sense, I was simplifying the situation in relation to the Wandle quite horribly, because obviously the Wandle became home to the Huguenots when they fled France, and it's been an industrial centre as a river for a very many hundreds of years. And so the business misconnections and the use by industry of that river are very typical, I think, of many areas of London. And so the issues about misconnections, as well as what you're doing in the treatment plants and how you manage the whole system, is very well mentioned. And also, I should at this point say thank you very much for the invitation to Mogden, which a couple of Assembly members have already accepted with alacrity. I can't quite understand why more people seem interested in being on the boat with the PLA and the Environment Agency than going to the sewage works, but I suppose it's a mystery. Obviously at this point, but you'll be very welcome to join us if you want to come to the sewage works or on the boat, both in fact. My last question I wanted to just put to Joe Pecorelli from ZSL. Obviously, at some long time ago in the past, and I've actually been to Abbey Mills and heard the entire history of how we came to combine sewage disposal with rivers and culverting many of the rivers, which of course are still hidden in London, you can't see them. Do you feel that we are now making sufficient steps in the right direction? Do you think we're starting to gain that understanding as Londoners and as a local authorities, regional authority and national authority of what we really need to do to make rivers a proper home for not just for us to use for leisure, but also for the creatures that live in them?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly room for optimism, isn't there? Some of the conversations we've heard today about sustainable urban drainage systems links to, obviously, directly to river health. And with the London River Restoration Group, the last 20 years, about 39 kilometres of river have been restored, many through the GLA's Rewild Fund, which is more of that would be very welcome. You talk to communities, often restoration of rivers in London, it's a social challenge, not just a technical one. And communities are really on board, organisations like ours, Thames 21, South East Rivers Trust. The focus is on working with communities to work together to restore rivers, and there's a clamour. You go to, like you love your beloved Wandle, everyone has their own river, their own patch, and that is why the Outfall Safari programme gets hundreds of people every year that join us to do these surveys of polluted surface water outfalls. It's really hideous. No one wants to do it, but they come along because they love their local patch. So you have to be optimistic. We're facing huge environmental challenges. big structural investment problems, but we'll get there, I think. There you go.
On a positive note, I'm going to thank all of the Assembly members. We've discussed a very big, wide-ranging set of topics today, because we haven't just spoken about river and waters, and I'd particularly like to thank all of our guests for all of their responses, and also for Cathryn for taking all the questions about this morning's events that weren't expected. We've now reached the end of this session. We have a few more items of business that we need to go through before we finish our meeting. Obviously, you're very welcome to stay for those, but we will completely understand if you decide at this point that this is the moment to head towards the door. I did say that once at an oversight meeting, and someone then literally ran to the door, so I'm sure you'll be far more dignified than that. No, it wasn't actually. It was somebody from one of the pension authorities that we've just been asking some very awkward questions of. It was to do with pensions. Anyway, that was a completely different panel, and I'm sure you'll be very dignified as you leave. Could I ask the committee to note the report that we received in the discussion that we've just had? Could I also ask you to delegate authority to me as the chair in consultation with the party group lead members to agree any outputs from today's two discussions? Thank you. The Environment Committee work programme is found at pages 113 to 16 in your agenda pack. Can I ask you to note the programme for the 23-24 Assembly year? Noted. The date of the next meeting is going to be on the 18th of October, and it's at 10 o'clock, and it's going to be in committee rooms 2 and 3 at City Hall. We've been bounced out of the chamber for reasons unknown to me. There's no urgent business, so I'm now going to declare this meeting closed.
Thank you, Chair.